Well, let's just do a quick check on who's up to date, because we're going to be doing chapters 7 and 8 today.
Well, I just did some listening, so I don't know what I'm up to.
So who knows where you're up to?
Exactly.
Right. This is what I find as well. I have to go back. I actually must confess that I go back the night before. And oh, sorry, yeah, 7 and 8. I go back the night before and stay up late going back through those particular chapters, because otherwise I can never remember exactly where I'm up to, because I've listened to the book that many times. I don't want to start quoting things that are in the later chapters.
Spoil the ending.
Yes, spoiler alert. Shamey dies at the end. Oh no, I let the cat out of the bag. That's a standing joke in our house, because Jo did that one time when she came back a bit tipsy from the pub, and we walked in and Troy was sitting there watching a movie, and it was about 15 minutes from the end, and she goes, "Oh, I've seen that movie. It's really good. Yeah, Shamey dies at the end." It's just like, "Mom, you just ruined it." So, yes, Jo is notorious for that one. Okay, well, I think we've given potential latecomers enough time. Let's pay tribute instead to the people who are here and present and excited and raring to go. We are here again today to continue our review of this gem here, The Infinite Game, in our little series, Creating Your Ideal Life. In this particular case, the series is Distilling Wisdom from Books. So the books that I've read and have found that have had quite a profound influence, and one of my favorite authors here, Simon Sinek, with The Infinite Game, the best-selling author who also wrote Start With Why and Leaders Eat Last, and shot to fame with his famous TEDx talk about the way that leaders think, and mentioning the golden circle in particular, which caught everyone's attention. So if you haven't watched that, I'd highly recommend watching that video. It only goes for about 18 minutes. It's a very interesting TED talk that he gave. So how do you win a game that has no end? That's the infinite game. The difference between playing a finite game with a set of rules and a clear winner and a loser, and the infinite game where it has no end, because, like, for instance, you can't win life. You can't really win business. You can do well in business, you can do well in life, but by whose standards? How do you judge it? How do you measure it? So just a very, very quick recap, because everyone who's present today has been here for the previous ones, I believe. So the difference between finite and infinite, as I just said, is about rules. And he started off the very beginning of the book talking about the Tet Offensive in Vietnam, when the North Vietnamese broke the rules and attacked the Americans without warning on what was previously held to be a sacred day, a holiday, a bit like our Christmas Day, where people stopped fighting like they did in the First World War. They were singing songs to each other and stopped shooting at each other. In this particular case, the Americans managed to repel the offensive. We went on to say how catastrophic the amount of casualties that the Americans inflicted on the North Vietnamese, and yet they won so many battles but still lost the war. How does that happen? Well, it happened because the Americans were fighting a finite game where they thought they could win it. They could win something. What can you actually win in war? I think history's proven time and again that war doesn't really, it might have a conqueror or somebody who wins temporarily, but everything's cyclical, and people that have been conquered tend to rise up and resist, and things change. So whereas the Vietnamese were fighting for their existence, for their survival, and some comparisons there with today with the war in Ukraine, where you've got the Ukrainians fighting for their freedom, for their very right to exist as a sovereign nation. So there's a lot of distinctions there. As always, Simon comes up with some great little stories, talks about one of his favorite comparisons, Microsoft and Apple, and how Microsoft's philosophy seems to be all about trying to beat Apple and comparing themselves with Apple all the time, which is a game that really is a pointless game. Apple are playing instead the game where they look at how they can keep on improving things for the customer. And that is a long-term, that's an infinite game, because we can always keep improving. So the lesson from that is, as in business, as in life, we are all a work in progress. We're all constantly evolving, learning new things, hopefully really only in competition with ourselves in terms of, are we a better person, or do we know more, or have we more skill sets than we had yesterday? And do we feel like we've progressed? So really it's about progress rather than winning as such. But yet our society has been built on that premise of being able to win, being able to hit sales targets, or being able to outdo the competitor. But again, history's proven that those who are willing to reinvent themselves in times of crisis are the ones who ultimately will survive. Great example of that was the company Victorinox, who made the Swiss Army knives, and how when 9/11 occurred, it took away a large chunk of their trade because the gift market was decimated in terms of, you cannot take a Swiss Army knife onto an aircraft ever since 9/11. In fact, you can't take very much onto an aircraft these days. You have to take your shoes and your belt off and all sorts to just get through security, show your laptop and everything. And as I said, I had a pair of pliers confiscated off me in Dublin airport out of my guitar case, which I thought was rather pointless. You know, standing at the front of the aircraft going, take me to Cuba with a pair of pliers in your hand, you'd feel a bit silly. But not that I do want to go to Cuba, but not that desperately. And I don't think the plane would have made it from Dublin anyway. But it was only flying to London. So I don't think they had the fuel to get me to Cuba. But the point was, that aside, is that Victorinox reinvented themselves. And today Swiss Army knives only account for about 35% of their revenue. But instead, they started selling travel gear, watches, and fragrances, and are now doing double the revenue compared to the days before September 11. So there's a lot of lessons there in how having a more of an infinite mindset means we're more adaptable, and particularly having a just cause. And he goes on to define what he means by a just cause, and that you must follow five. A leader who wants to adopt an infinite mindset must follow 5 essential practices. Can anyone remember what those 5 essential practices were? Dun, 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 putting you on the spot. Don't worry, because I know everyone's listened to the book and they can think, how do I find that? It's in an audiobook. Well, advancing a just cause is the first one. Build trusting teams, which we'll be coming to in a moment. There's a bit of a spoiler alert for you. Study your worthy rivals. Prepare for existential flexibility, just like the Victorinox story there. Demonstrate the courage to lead. So those were what he called the 5 essential practices for an infinite mindset. And then he went on to talk about those things. So a just cause, which has to be durable, resilient, and timeless, ideally something bigger than yourself. As always, backed it up with some great stories, particularly things like the Declaration of Independence and how the American, what do they call them? The fathers of the nation stood up to the British colonial rule and launched the Declaration of Independence, which started out really as a protest at too much taxes, but really became a much bigger cause about creating a society where, in theory, everyone's free. And as he says, that might be a quest that is never truly fulfilled. It's an ongoing quest. And we have Christopher joining us from Sydney at the moment, I'm guessing, back from Singapore.
You guessed correct.
So just on that, we've got Yanni tuning in from California. We've got Coralie in New Zealand. We've got Stan in Perth, and now we've got Chris in Sydney and me in Perth. So we are truly an international cast this morning as we continue reviewing Simon Sinek's amazing book. What else? The Founding Fathers. great example of a cause as also was the guy with the seeds. What was his name again? The seed collection in Russia. I know Stan will come up with it in a moment. Meanwhile, I'll just mention that he talked about the moonshot being
the guy with the seeds.
Thanks, Stan.
Yeah.
So the guy, the guy with the moonshot was John F. Kennedy, determined to get America to win the race to get man onto the moon. But really, it wasn't. It was only a stepping stone, wasn't it? The idea was really that we are continuing on beyond that in our search for other habitable planets. So that's more the long-term or infinite game, rather than just getting to the moon, which was all about winning and beating the Russians to be the first people to get there, wasn't it? Okay, so what else? Oh, he talked about Walmart. Great example, Walmart, because it was founded by Sam Walton, who was very visionary and had a just cause about making life, everyday essential items cheaper for the community. And Simon gives the example in the book about how when Walmart began, communities would campaign to have a Walmart store in their community, whereas after Sam died and the reins passed over to his successor, who had more of a finite mindset and was all about getting the profit figures on track for the shareholders rather than the customer. And he talks about the order of information in their speeches, that the customer came last, whereas when Sam Walton used to talk to customers first, it was all about the customer. Over the years, Walmart's reputation began to decline. They were taken up in various legal actions with discriminatory things, unfair treatment, unfair payment of wages, all sorts of stuff. And it came to a point where communities were actively campaigning to not have a Walmart in their area. I believe that is now turning around with a new CEO, but it just shows how a company who at the time was the most profitable retail company in the world could easily be dragged down by not pursuing the infinite game. So, how are we going? I think we're just about up to where we're up to. Does that make sense? That makes sense to me. We want to feel part of something bigger than ourselves. And we want to protect our people. We don't want our people who work for us in fear of their loss of their jobs, because of what typically tends to happen with companies playing a finite game, is that they set things up so that it's all about achieving profit targets and results. And that may mean laying off staff to get their costs under control. It usually starts with that, doesn't it? It's one of the biggest expenses in business. So if they can cut back on staff, they can get the profit figure looking good, which usually means the CEO gets a nice big fat bonus. And what about the families who have just been laid off and no longer have work? Well, they're dispensable or expendable. So that is not the kind of environment that you want. You want an environment where people not only don't fear going to work and fear the loss of their jobs, but also feel like they're contributing to something. And Stan has just brought home the bacon, as I knew he would, or in this case, the seeds. Nicholas Vavilov was the Russian who came up with the fantastic seed collection, which was all about a greater cause of making sure that everyone in humanity could feed their families. And when they were surrounded during the Second World War by the Nazis, a lot of these Russians gave up their lives to protect the unknown location of this seed collection. And even when they were besieged and starving and could have eaten the seeds to keep going, they would rather starve to death than eat those seeds, because they believed in the cause. Now, that's a very powerful example. And I have to admit, I had not heard about it until I read Simon's book. So the belief also that if you can look after your people, then they will be more likely to contribute ideas, labor, if the company's struggling and you've generated that kind of goodwill within your company, people will even sometimes offer to take voluntary unpaid holidays or cut back their hours or even cut back their wages just to help keep the company afloat if they believe in the validity of that company. But they certainly won't do that if the company has a track record of laying people off and being ruthless. So chapter 7 is where we are up to in the infinite game. Was that a fair summary? I just tried to speed through the salient points there. Anyone want to add anything that they think I might have missed on those first 6 chapters, or anything that leapt out at you that hasn't been mentioned? No one? Okay. Chapter 7 is trusting teams. For those who've been listening on audiobook and can't remember where they're up to, trusting teams. So he starts off with another great story about the Shell Ursa, the biggest offshore deep water drilling platform that the Shell Oil Company had ever built. And it goes 3,000 feet below the surface of the ocean and cost $1.45 billion to build, which is about 5.35 billion in today's dollars. Wow, 48 stories tall. And he talks about how the guy who was running this platform was in charge of leading the job. Rick Fox had an infinite enough mindset that he believed firmly in the safety of the employees there. So he hired a lady called Claire Nuer, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, who was a Holocaust survivor but operated a leadership consulting practice, and her philosophies were all about building trust in the team through having deep and meaningful conversations where people, with employees, co-workers, shared their life stories, I guess, and their feelings, particularly their feelings about what they believed in, what their life was all about. And this point about, in order to build trust, you need to be vulnerable. You need to let people in below the veneer, below the face we put on in public. And I don't mean Yanni putting on makeup. I mean the face that we put out to the outside world about. I'm just having a little dig because Yanni always likes to get her makeup on before the meetings to look glamorous for us. It's how we want to be seen in the world, isn't it? How do we want people? On oil rigs, they wanted to be seen as tough guys, you know, oil rig workers, we're tough guys. So the idea of, well, to start with any men talking about their feelings, but particularly tough oil rig workers, this was quite a revolutionary sort of idea. But he did it. He took on board her philosophies, got her to come in and talk and do presentations to the people. And over the course of a year, he built a team for the Shell Ursa. I don't know what Ursa stands for. Anyone know what Ursa stands for? Come on, Stan, you're my researcher. Something to do with rigs anyway, oil rigs. That the members felt psychologically safe with each other. So here's what I highlighted. For the feeling of trust to develop, we have to feel safe expressing ourselves first. We have to feel safe being vulnerable. And that's true really of anything in life. If you want to build friendships, you're sharing a bit about yourself. You obviously have to be willing to listen to the other people's vulnerabilities, their concerns, their fears, their stories. And quite often that's not the case in workplace environments. But what he found was, when you work for a trusting team, we feel safe to raise our hands and admit we made a mistake, to be honest about shortfalls in performance, to take responsibility for our behavior and ask for help. how often do people try to mask the fact that they might be struggling at work and they might need help, but they don't want to ask anyone for it because that shows weakness. That might show they don't truly know what they're doing. And he even quotes Brene Brown, another one of my favorite authors. In this, Brene Brown, the researcher, who's a great author, written several books. We will be covering some of them in our progress, I can tell you. But she says, trust is the stacking and layering of small moments and reciprocal vulnerability over time. Trust and vulnerability grow together, and to betray one is to betray both. And I'm just highlighting that because I didn't highlight it when I was checking back through last night. Quite important quotes there. If you're not on a trusting team, though, you don't really feel like you can express vulnerability. So what tends to happen is that in the team that doesn't trust people, people tend to fear losing the, hang on, Chris got a question there. Date of publication of the Infinite game. Well, that's a good question, Chris. Let's go back and have a quick look. Copyright was 2019. First published in USA 2019 by Portfolio Penguin. There you go. So yes, before the pandemic, I guess, or it was probably just about starting. It was 2019. I can't remember. It was late 2019, wasn't it, that it started?
I thought I read the book because it sounds familiar. It sounds similar to something I read.
Yeah, he does continue on a theme that he started in other books, really.
Okay.
But yeah, what were you thinking, Chris?
Well, about a decade ago, I read this book, which it's about this game of life where it's like the finite and infinite game where you liken it between the game of chess and the game of Go. Is that the same book?
I don't think
Whereby, in terms of relationships, people who have short-term goals, and most of the time, most people follow this, is they take life as a game of chess. It's like winner takes all. You climb to the top by stepping on people. But the infinite game is to keep on extending the game so that it continues and continues, like the game of Go. It's the Asian mentality of in that game where you want to develop relationships with a long-term goal.
Yeah, it sounds it's basically along the same lines. A couple of books which I think he actually references in here as well were books Jim Collins wrote, Built to Last and Good to Great, both of which were about studies of businesses who adopted infinite mindsets. What he was fascinated by businesses that stood the test of time. So he particularly tended to focus on businesses, I believe, over a 15-year period, which is quite a lengthy time frame in today's world when you think how quickly businesses can come and go. And you know, how even global events can really shake up companies and destroy companies that you wouldn't think would go under. There was one last week who we were mentioning last week, one of the major companies, I can't think it was now, but you know, we've got plenty of examples over the last few years of companies that have surprisingly gone under, that you would think were household names. Very often it's they fail to adapt or keep that infinite mindset that Sam Walton had for Walmart, for example. And so Jim Collins' books, the same. It was the principle that people who adopted a long-term vision tended to survive rather than trying to achieve short-term goals. And in this chapter, where he's talking about trusting teams, you've raised a very good point there, is that people will climb over each other to get to the top, or the perceived top of the hierarchy of the corporate ladder. And so that's where a team that doesn't trust each other, they'll withhold information from each other, or even sabotage another person, take the credit for somebody else's work, I'm sure we've all seen examples of that in our careers. I know I have one particular retail manager I can think of who I just think, what a smarmy character, because whenever anything went wrong, he always found somebody else to blame for it. And whenever everything went right, he managed to jump ahead and take the credit for other people's work, and ended up rising through the ranks. And now is a store manager with another big retail chain. And I just think, how could people not see through him? Because I could see it as a young trainee manager, but you know, he got away with it his whole career and just kept doing what he did and just convinced everybody that he was very good at what he did. So in a trusting,
there's a book on that.
That doesn't happen.
There's a book on that where I've been reading actually the audio and reading reading the actual book. It's The Laws of Power. It's quite insidious, whereby it teaches you how to climb to the top by finding scapegoats, because people don't like excuses, and also just that as well, to never admit. And the other point, the thing is, like, I went to Singapore, and you don't mind me sharing this?
Go for it.
I went to Singapore with a goal of connecting with friends and family, and I only had 1 week. And so what I did was I only arranged 5 meetings, but I suggested I was in Singapore when I was there, and I had a slew of invitations by messenger, and they all came out in the middle of the night, trying to find that tiny little sliver of time to meet me. Some of them I've never met face to face, and we've known each other for 3 to 4 decades. And they've just seen me online and they wanted to connect. And we've had wonderful, deep and meaningful conversations. And my goal, and I've read something similar to this, and I've always been applying it in my relationships, is that when I want something to last that long, 3 to 4 decades, I would lay the groundwork from the beginning, put forth my authentic self, and really, give people the mental and emotional availability when I'm with them. A number of times, a lot of people have been saying to me that they just don't have time. They are too busy, they don't have time, etc. With some friends, whether it's Singapore and Australia. And that's when we reflect on our priorities, really. I mean, we all have the same amount of 24/7, but really how you use that time and how you give that time, maybe to your family, maybe to yourself. But ultimately, if decades go by and you always say, I'm too busy, those relationships fizzle and die. You can't really say, well, we can pick it up from as if it was before and expect it to be the same, because people will change over that period of time. But I've told my friends, I will always have time for you. I will make that time because I value those relationships, and I will also meet you mutually. And anyone who actually got in touch with me, even if it was 2 a.m., I actually went out and met them. And these relationships, it's almost as if it's gone to the next level. And that's where I believe that building that trust with a long-term goal, not just for any agenda. I said you don't need to have a reason to keep in touch with me or just contact me or drop me a note. I will be there. And I mean, it may not be for everyone, but like, I'm not going to be one to say, hey, and it's not a judgment thing, but it's just the way I am. I'm not going to be one to say, hey, sorry, no time. But if I do have that, I say, let's arrange something and make sure it happens. And I put it down, and I know that these are people who, when I'm in the city, they will seek me out. A lot of them, we have mutual friends, but for decades, even if they're in the same city, they don't talk to each other, they don't contact each other. But they will seek me out and find me. and reconnect, and they will go out the way in the middle of the night. If they don't have transport, they will take an Uber, they will take a cab, and that was really precious. I mean, I had that genuine authenticity from the other person, and I just feel so happy that I went back, even though it was just a week.
Yeah, no, that's a great story, Chris. I think that's you've nailed it there. That you get back what you put out, really, don't you? And we've also got to be a little bit careful not to judge people who can't make it for some reason. They may have a genuine reason why they can't catch up in that time frame, but then usually they'll say, well, look, I'll try to catch you next time you're over, or they'll make some alternative arrangement, or even at least catch up on the phone or something. But
these are people who are like, for years and years and years, we try multiple times, and it's always one way. So
yeah,
it doesn't work that way.
We do know those sort of people. Yeah. So in a workplace situation, as he's talking about in here, that feeling safe to express our feelings is not to be confused with a lack of emotional professionalism. So you can't rage or disengage with someone on your team at work. Well, you can, but it doesn't really build trust and build a team. We still, as he said, we're still adults, and we will still act with respect, courtesy, and thoughtfulness, which is really what you're talking about there, Chris, isn't it? Is respect, courtesy, and thoughtfulness, making the extra effort to go the extra mile to show people that you care about them. And he goes on to give an example of the police in this chapter, or a policeman who attended one of these things and was, I can't go back to my police at work and tell them that I care about them. You know, it's too namby-pamby to say things like that. And Simon says to him, well, could you go back and say that you give a shit about them? And it's like, today when you go out there and you're putting your lives on the line, remember, I give a shit about you. I want you back here safe. And he said, yeah, I can say that. So it's a lot of often words, where the actions speak louder than the words. He goes on to talk about the Navy SEALs, another great example. And of course, Simon does a lot of work with US military, but the Navy SEALs, they will rate someone who's not necessarily a high performer, but they will rate them as potential to join the team if they are people who care about the other team members and the people that they can trust. Because in that situation, in a war situation, when the chips are down, you're up against it, you need to know you can rely on the people around you. And it doesn't necessarily mean the highest performers, because people can always improve their skills over time. But people who don't have the right character, the right true grit to join the team will not be allowed to join. They'll be the ones who drop out of the SEAL training, which is intensely tough. So he asks the question, if the SEALs, who are some of the highest performing teams in the world, prioritize trust before performance, then why do we still think performance matters first in business? And it's this thing of the finite mindset, that people who think looking after themselves, as you mentioned, the ones who climb over people to get to the top, he calls them the toxic team members. They're often more interested in their own performance and career trajectories than they are with helping the whole team to rise. And that kind of behavior will eventually undermine trust. Things like hoarding information instead of sharing it, stealing credit instead of giving it, manipulating younger team members, and throwing others under the bus to avoid personal accountability. Wow. Yeah. You know anyone who's thrown somebody under a bus? Metaphorically, of course, not physically. Well, maybe it is physically, I don't know. You might know someone who has thrown someone under a bus. So the question that a leader has to ask then is, if someone's performance is struggling, or if they're acting in a way that is negatively impacting the dynamics of the team, the main question a leader needs to ask is, are they coachable? Can we work with this person to improve them so that they can become a key member of the team. Gave the example of Chief Corley and Officer Coyle, the police officer who had a really hard time when he was picked on by the other members of the team and not really looked after. And Corley came in as a new police chief, and he listened to all the police officers. And one of the first things he did was to build a fence around their car park, where they had to go late at night to go and get back into their cars, and they weren't feeling very safe because some of the local gang members, hoodlums, could have been out there waiting for them. So he made sure that he built a fence or a circle of safety. So in a team, people need to feel safe with each other. Real or perceived, when there is danger, we act from a place of fear rather than confidence. So you're going to get a lot more out of the team if you can make them feel safe and make them feel part of something. I've highlighted this part here. We must model the behavior we want to see, actively incentivize the kinds of behaviors that build trust and give people responsible freedom and the support they need to flourish in their jobs. It is the combination of what we value and how we act that sets the culture of the company. Big buzzword these days, isn't it? Culture. It's all about creating a culture where people feel like this is the way we do things in this company. This is the way we act. This is the way we support each other. It's the way we operate. And that's so important to build a positive culture. He says to build a culture based on trust takes a lot of work. It starts by creating a space in which people feel safe and comfortable to be themselves. Now, I immediately thought back to the days when I ran my backpackers hostel. That was something I declared, and I hadn't read this book back then, but I always declared that one of the things that made it successful was that we created an environment where everyone could be themselves. They felt comfortable, they felt safe enough to be vulnerable and to just be themselves. They didn't have to put on this act of being the person they thought they needed to portray themselves as in order to fit in. They could just be themselves and they'd be accepted for who they were. And that's what made it successful. That's what made people want to stay longer and want to keep coming back and tell other people to come and stay there. So good leadership and trusting teams allow the people on those teams to do the best job that they can. The result is a culture of solving problems rather than putting band-aids on them. Right. Oh, Chris dropped out and now he's rejoined. Okay. Bit of technical issue there, Chris. So if we don't create trust in a workplace, he says, if someone has to muster the energy to go to a job they hate every day, it will take a toll on their confidence and negatively affect their judgment. Has anyone ever had a job where they hated it? Yeah, I've had a job where I wasn't looking forward to going to work, and it's a horrible feeling, isn't it? And when I quit that job, I vowed I would never let that happen again. That I would make sure that whatever job I was doing, I was going to enjoy it and not feeling in a situation where I was trapped, where I had bills to pay and I had no choice. I had to go and do this job, because there's always a better job around the corner. There's always something else you can do in a different work environment that's happier for you. So, again, he talks about leadership in the Marine Corps, working with the military again. The ability to succeed is not what makes someone a leader. Qualities like honesty, integrity, courage, resiliency, perseverance, judgment, and decisiveness are what the Marines have learned after years of trial and error, are more likely to engender the kind of trust and cooperation that over the course of time increase the likelihood that a team will succeed more often than it fails. So yes, that's pretty much it on that chapter on trusting teams, unless anyone else has any thoughts they want to add about that chapter, about anything that occurred to them. No takers? Okay. Chapter 8.
For me, it's being able to, I think the only way you can be honest is if it's you're trying your best, right? Like the ones you say, you know, the one that pretended to be. So I think the only way you could be honest is by allowing people to be honest with themselves. And if you can't do that yourself, I don't think you could do that with anybody else, you know, and it's always a reflection. And when you were saying the story about that manager that went up that ladder, it came to my mind, you know, where it says when we're used to being lied to all the time, we get used to that energy. When we are used to being honest all the time, we're used to that energy. So if you are always lied to and there's people lying, that energy feels normal. So there's no way people cannot not lie, if that makes sense, you know. And I think the environment you're used to, you allow that to flow through until you actually become real to you. I think you're able to distinguish what's real or not. So for me, it's been like this is like my friend right here is like we're both learning, but this is the first time I feel I'm able to be honest, like, and you know, because I don't know everything, but everybody else like tells me like, oh, you seem like this, you seem like that, and I was like, yeah, but I'm not. You know. And it's like and I'm able to be like, I could ask questions, I could, and she will always be kind enough, and she will like not talk me down or anything. And I think that's the way I like to be as well, you know, with that energy, because you always feel when somebody's like trying to help you, but they're like trying to talk down to you, even though they're not saying it, but they're kind of, you feel that sarcasm or something. But then you could feel when somebody's genuine, when you like, I don't get it, and they're like, okay, let's do it this way, like, I don't get it, you know. And it's like, all right, but then you could feel that genuine. And I feel like all of that is with the energy you're portraying, you know. So that's my intake.
Yes, very good, Yanni. That's absolutely right. Energy is really what culture is all about, isn't it? Creating a positive energy where people can be themselves and be the best version of themselves, and strive to contribute and feel they want to contribute because that positive energy is there. It's very much about energy, the energy that we give off to the people around us.
And what I've noticed, I don't know about other cultures, but in Mexico, what Hispanics, they used to lie to their kids so much in order for them not to see the real world. But that makes a totally different personality for that person. They try to protect them to a lot of harshness instead of being honest about reality. You probably cannot explain it in the same way as a kid, as an adult. You have to actually lower yourself, but the words you with the words you use, but the understanding of the level to that. And I think that it had also helped me to even be honest with my baby. Like she kind of feels when I'm lying, because in order for me to protect her, and I have to keep telling myself, okay, mamas, this is what I'm gonna do. I want this and that because of this. I know you want this, but I have to do it because of this. And instead of telling her yeah, and then doing something else, is that I think that is what molds you, you know. And you bring all of that to business, to wherever you're at. It's funny how I used to be somebody at church, somebody at the house, somebody else at school, because I thought that's who I needed to be. But I was like, let me take all those personalities and put it all in one and see what I get, you know, get the best of all those personalities. So I'm working a lot on that and trying to be honest as much as possible, you know, because sometimes I'm not gonna say it's HARD, but it's challenging, you know. But as long as you're like conscious enough of who you want to be, I think that's where you get that of the other person. So yeah.
So the key word really is authenticity.
Yes.
It's being your authentic self, and actually realizing that life is sort of holographic. How we are in one area tends to actually be how we are in lots of other areas. how we behave, you know, in one area tends to be how we behave overall. We might not realize it necessarily, but the clues are there. We can try and put on that face to pretend that we're something that we're not, but people who are observing carefully will usually see through that anyway.
Yes.
So being authentic and willing to risk being authentic and risk being judged for it is a key part of it. You should feel safe enough, or simply develop the resilience that you don't care what other people think. There's that old saying, you know, what other people think of me is none of my business. And does it really matter what other people think? Well, in a workplace, you probably feel like you want to impress the boss, because the boss is deciding whether you get the pay rise or the promotion or not. And so that's where you get a lot of this, people putting on an act to try to convince somebody else that they're worthy of the next promotion or the next pay rise. But in general, in life, we get a lot better results if we're authentic, if we feel safe enough to be vulnerable, to be authentic. And that's really the truest expression of who we are. And that nicely segues into the next chapter, which is chapter 8, ethical fading. So this principle that what starts out as being, what should we say, a white lie or something that you can do that you think, well, that's not really going to be in conflict with my values. It's okay if we just do this a little bit. It then becomes the new norm. So as he said, ethical fading is a condition in a culture that allows people to act in unethical ways in order to advance their own interests, often at the expense of others, whilst falsely believing that they have not compromised their own moral principles. So well, it says ethical fading often starts with small, seemingly innocuous transgressions that, when left unchecked, continue to grow and compound. Now, this, in my own experience, related back to my retail days, you would find that a staff member might be short of cash, might not be able to afford to buy their lunch that day or something, and so they borrow, you know, $5 or something out of the till to get their lunch, and then realize that, well, no one really missed it and they can afford it anyway. And soon the $5 becomes $10, and then it becomes $50. And this is how these sort of slippery paths can begin. And I remember one girl that we caught in the supermarket who started off by putting, this is back in UK, £1 coins. She had a long pair of long boots on, and she'd drop a £1 coin down the side of her leg and into the boots. And eventually the security staff were keeping her under observation and realized that's how she was doing it, because her till was always short. And, you know, people, they don't start out thinking, I'm going to be a big thief here, I'm going to steal as much as I can off this company. They start out needing to buy their lunch or something like that and get away with it. Chris, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I have a question, which is question adjacent. Quite a lot of things which I'm noticing happening here is wage theft. And that's when, you know, we are confronted with employers, my daughter's employer being one, both of them. They, by law, you're supposed to round up every 15 minutes to the next, but they would deliberately go in and they would round down to the lower one. In other words, underpaying. And then the boss would go and have their luxury holiday in Fiji and elsewhere. And me and Julie have, my daughter and I have come to the attitude that if somebody comes and steals from, let's say, decides not to pay and runs off, we just have this attitude, well, it's beyond our, it's above our pay grade to run after that person, because, you know, we ourselves are being being stolen, as in being robbed by the bosses, and that's quite common. I've noticed as well. I mean, how should we go about it? I mean, the only way really, and we've confronted them, and they just have this, well, they just brush it off and dismiss. Unless we go to fair trading or some sort of like take them to tribunal, nothing happens. And we don't want that, because in the end, it ends up being, you know, you can get fired. But it's a real big problem, especially, you know, a lot of people who are rich have this let them eat cake attitude, which we see in Australia. I mean, our ex-prime minister said, oh, if you can't afford rent, just buy a house, you know. And my mom also did something similar to my daughter. We're struggling with rent. And then she said, well, you should really quickly buy an apartment. Excuse me, I mean, in order to buy an apartment, you need to put, you know what, 10-20% down payment, which is at least 5 digits. And how do we afford that? You know, I mean, do we decide not to eat, you know, for years? So there is this big disconnect with reality. I mean, it just smacks in the face of the main plot of Les Miserables, whereby the main character was imprisoned and for servitude because he stole a loaf of bread. So that's the thing which I need to reconcile as well, because it's all good. It's all great to say, hey, we need to be authentic, but authenticity, I mean, I by nature am authentic, but the problem is it's not done me any favors. In fact, it's actually been an Achilles heel. So I've had to play that down quite a bit, especially in corporate and in my past work as legal. In fact, one of my colleagues lamented, she went and did her master's in law in the UK university, and she topped the class, came back to her wonderful job and realized that all those people who were underqualified got above and surpassed her in terms of seniority and in promotion. And then I asked her this question, do you know how to brown nose? Do you know how to, you know, suck up to your bosses and all that and be inauthentic? Because the only way to, if you have to play by the rules of the organization, you know, otherwise you just get left in the dirt. I mean,
Chris, can I just ask you something? Is that a story that you're telling yourself?
It's happening. It's happening.
There's no doubt that it does. There's no doubt that it does. And that is what Simon's talking about, is a comparison between a company with a finite mindset and a company with an infinite mindset. Right. If you want to build a culture of trust, we're just talking about trusting teams, as if the employer wants to have staff they can trust, then they need to behave authentically and give trust. They need to create an environment where they are trusted as employers and the employees trust each other.
That's a top-down thing.
Basically a circle of trust. Yeah, for sure. This is what he's saying in the book, is that this is an infinite mindset, and it's the leader's responsibility to create that environment where trust can grow, where people don't start off. If you've got all the employees working there thinking that they're being ripped off by their boss, what kind of an environment are you going to have? How are they going to contribute? Are they going to go, oh, I'll come up with new ideas of how to make the boss more money if they feel like the boss is ripping them off? No, of course they're not. So he goes on to say in this, just because I'm just aware of time, Chris, I don't mean to cut you off there, but he's saying, as human beings, we're blessed and cursed with our ability for rational thought. We can also use this capacity for analytical thinking to explain or justify our behavior when we know it violates some deep-seated code of ethics or helps us avoid some sense of guilt we may harbor for a decision we took. It's like stealing something from a rich friend or an employee and saying to yourself, they won't even notice. Besides, they can afford another one. We can rationalize it any way we want. We still stole something from a friend. So it's that thing about white lies. You know, are we telling ourselves, oh, well, it's okay. Are we rationalizing it? You know, rationalizing being telling ourselves rational lies. Are we coming up with a story that it's okay to, in this case, as you mentioned, to round down instead of rounding up? But how would they like it if it was done to them? How would they like it if they were the employee and they were working for someone else that did that? So you get what you put, we get back what you put out, don't you? If the employers are not treating their staff with respect and not paying them appropriately, or not creating a fair environment, it's a give and take thing. I always used to say with my staff, and I still do today, you know, if you need time off for something, let me know in advance and we can plan for it. We can get somebody else to cover your shift or something. One of the things I always used to hate was sickies. That's an Australian condition. They call it taking a sickie or chucking a sickie. You know, oh, the boss can afford it. I'll just take the day off sick and go out, you know, doing whatever I feel like doing. I'm not really sick, but I'm entitled to take so many days off sick. No, that's not the reason for sick leave entitlement. It's there to protect you when you are genuinely sick. And yet it's become sort of, oh, it's okay to lie to the boss and just take a day off and go out with your mates or do something you want to do. You don't feel like going to work that day, and they'll still pay your wages anyway. Isn't that the same kind of thing? Isn't that also, you know, ripping off the boss as well, really? And also putting pressure on your teammates because somebody's got to cover for you when you're not there. So we know how this can happen. We know that everyone's really can be looking out for themselves, but they'll rationalize that behavior is okay because, well, the boss can afford it. In your case, you're saying that the employer is at fault, and they're saying, oh, well, this staff member can manage without that. I'm sure they're probably taking things they're not entitled to. So I'll just, you know, cut back 15 minutes and I'll only be getting back what they're taking off me anyway. What kind of environment are you creating? If that's what you think of your employees, you're setting yourself up probably to fail. So ethical fading is not an event. It doesn't just suddenly arrive like a switch was flipped. It's more like an infection that festers over time. So that I thought was a key point, that this kind of behaving badly will eventually take its toll. It might not happen straight away, but it will eventually come back to haunt you. The employer you're describing, that if all the staff feel that they're being ripped off by this employer, at some point, eventually, that's going to backfire on them, because the staff, when they need the staff to help them, won't be there to help them. If you suddenly go, oh, I really need somebody to come in and work the shift because somebody else is calling sick, stuff you, I'm not doing that. You know, because if you don't do the right thing by people, it will come back.
Yeah, you need to do right for others.
Yeah. The law of karma will get you. He gave a great example of when good people do bad things, the EpiPen. Did you remember that story? So the company that a company called Milan in 2007 bought the rights to the EpiPen brand, and because there was no real competition in that market, which is the pen that you use to inject people with, you know, if you've had a bee sting or something like that, wasn't it? Was one of those kind of reactive type things if you're having an allergic reaction or something. So they realized that because there wasn't really much competition, they could raise the price of the product by an average of 22% each year. And when they saw the impact that these price increases had on their figures, on their stock value, they started to get greedy. And so they then kept on bouncing the price up from 22% to 32%. After the 15th price hike since 2009, in 2016, Milan announced that a pair of EpiPens would now cost an all-time high of $600, representing a 500% increase over 6 years. Talk about ruthless and exploitative. The system exists. Did they do anything wrong? If someone's willing to pay the price and you can put the price up, is that okay? Well, is it okay, or is it taking advantage? Is it profiteering from people who need that product? And you know they need that product. So the culture is placing ethics. If they placed ethics above earnings and believed that the primary responsibility was to the just cause rather than to the company itself or the shareholders, then the company could have used their might in the market to become a champion for change much sooner and with a lot less fuss. So it was quite a scandal that when people realized that that they were acting so unethically. We humans have all sorts of clever ways, he talks about self-deception here, to rationalize our behavior and deceive ourselves into thinking that the ethically questionable decisions we make are fair and justified, even though a reasonable person would view our actions as quite the opposite. So we can actually tell lies to ourselves. We can convince ourselves that what we did was fine. There was nothing wrong with it, and it's perfectly acceptable, even though there's sort of in the back of your mind there's a nagging doubt that, hang on, I didn't really, did I do the right thing there? So what they do is they come up with words. So you got some good examples here. We talk about managing externalities instead of talking plainly about the harm our manufacturing processes cause to the people who work in our factories and the environment. Gamification to enhance the user experience is easier to swallow than we found a way to get people addicted to our product to boost our results. Isn't that a good one? Human beings become data points, and data mining is a more palpable way of saying that we are tracking people's every click, trip, and personal habit. We reduce headcounts, and the online ticket broker charges us a convenience fee instead of calling it what it is, a surcharge. Convenience fee, I love that one. Convenience fee. Oh dear. What's the old real estate one? A renovator's paradise. Means a dilapidated old wreck of a house that no one will buy. Oh yes, you've got to love marketing.
Yeah, you see the potential.
Yes, see view glimpses or something like that, which means if you stand on a chair in one corner of the room, you might get a glimpse of the ocean, you know. See glimpses. Yes, and the social media is one of those things where we pander to getting extra likes or wanting people to notice how important what we had for dinner was last night, and and that kind of thing. Deceptive technology, because it's pandering to people's insecurities and their desire to be liked, to be appreciated, to be noticed. Meanwhile, they're selling your information to marketing companies, which is why every time you talk about something, you notice it pops up on your social media feeds. You might mention, I don't know, a dog kennel or something, and then suddenly you'll see adverts for dog kennels coming out. Were they listening to my conversation? How did they know that? Interesting. So he gave examples. Milan, Wells Fargo was another one in book of, and this particular thing of offering a rebate on a product, but knowing full well that it then, you know, people have got to cut out a coupon and fill in a form and send it off somewhere, and that most people will never get around to doing that. They, you know, how many times is it you buy this and you redeem this against that, and people don't, do they? I mean, warranties is another one of those. Or if you up, you know, buy the extended warranty, you can keep bringing the product back. Who keeps the warranty card or remembers that 3 years down the track that they can take that product back because they paid an extended warranty period or something? Very often people don't. So is that ethical? If you know that people probably won't get the value from that transaction.
It's exploitative.
Well,
it's a scam.
Ethical vaping is about self-delusion. So When leaders use process to replace judgment, the conditions for ethical fading persist, even in cultures that hold themselves to higher moral and ethical standards. He gave the example of soldiers again, because he does so much work with the military, about how the leader, I can't remember the rank, but the one officer admitted he'd collect all the ID cards of his 9-man squad, pick the smartest guy in the group to complete the training 9 times so that everyone could get a certificate, because they saw it as, we just need to tick the box. This is just bureaucracy. In order to carry on, we all need this certificate. So we'll get the smartest guy. He can do it 9 times and then everyone passes. And they didn't see that as cheating or lying. They just saw it as checking the boxes. I wonder in how many instances in business, I always remember back in supermarket days when I worked in supermarkets, that head office would send out these checklists that you had to fill, like a housekeeping checklist. You know, did you sweep the storeroom? Did you clean this? Did you do that? And yeah, every manager in the company used to just tick all the boxes and go, yep, I did that today. Yep, did it. Because they probably did most of it. They didn't necessarily do all of it, but they needed to tick the boxes so they could send it back to head office and go, yes, it all got done. Because otherwise, what are they admitting? That I didn't do my job properly, or that, you know, we ran out of time to get that done. So no, they just tick it. Anyway, so what was the point of the checklist? If no one was actually using it as a checklist, they were simply ticking the boxes. So another one, interestingly, in spilling out into life here, it's like telling someone we have to cancel plans because of a family issue, when in reality there is no family issue. We just want to get out of the plans without hurting someone's feelings. Oh, the white lie. Is that a white lie? Oh no, I can't come to your party this week that I said I would come to because the cat's sick and we need to stay home and look after the cat. Or whatever. I don't have a cat, by the way, but so if I ever use that one on you, you know I'm making it up. So is it a harmless white lie? We still believe we're an honest person, but we actually lied, didn't we? So we can all look in the mirror there, can't we, and ask ourselves, have I ever told any white lies to anyone? Is there a difference between a white lie and a lie?
I think we all have.
I think so.
Is it necessary to always tell the truth? I mean, if I were to be asked, are you fine? And I would say no all the time, it's inappropriate. Like, for example, in Australia, you say, how are you? People are not really interested to know whether you're fine or not. You're just supposed to say, good, how are you back? You know, it's so ingrained.
Yes,
I mean,
and that's the difference between an acknowledgement, kind of a courtesy greeting, as opposed to a genuine friend actually knowing who you are and knowing your story and wanting to know if you're okay and actually caring about the answer. And I think there are those distinctions we need to have to a certain degree in order to function as a society. Otherwise, you'd be sitting there listening to everyone's life story all day, wouldn't you? You know, how are you? No, I didn't really want you to tell me. And how are you today, Kevin?
I had to buy a new black jersey. It had a new logo on it.
Oh, very good. Very good.
I haven't changed the colours. We're still black.
Okay, still a Kiwi. Well done. And all black. All right, so ethical lapses happen. So there's a difference there perhaps between an ethical lapse and ethical fading. An ethical lapse is where you might just be human and you make a mistake and then you go, oh, I didn't really do that very well, or I didn't handle that, or I couldn't, you know, I told a white lie there. Was that the right thing to do? We know when we sort of go, we shouldn't really have done that. That's one thing, that's being human. Ethical fading is where we continue to deceive ourselves and bullshit ourselves, basically, that we've acted honorably when we know damn well we haven't. So how do we guard against that? Well, having a just cause is one of the things, and having an infinite mindset. So Ethical decisions are not based on what's best for the short term. They are based on the right thing to do. Whereas short-termism at the expense of ethics slowly weakens a company. Doing the right thing slowly strengthens it. So if you want to build a successful business or even have a successful life, doing the right thing more of the time and having an infinite mindset is going to be the result, is going to give you the result that you're looking for. If you look at friendships, for instance, if you keep on, you know, not turning up for the person's party or not really caring about how they are, what kind of a relationship are you going to build long term? If you want a true friendship, you need to put that effort in and actually genuinely care and behave ethically, or choose not to bother, you know, either distance yourself and not be a friend, or if you want a genuine friendship, then you've got to put the work in, haven't you? You've got to be there for that person when they need you, not necessarily when you feel like it. And it's the same with business. You know, if you want to build a successful business, take the longer term view and do the right thing to do, not just what's going to get you through this situation short term, as much as you possibly can. And we're all human, we all make mistakes, but this is all about progress. Anyone want to add anything to that? Because we are at time, we're over time actually.
What happens if there's a conflict of interest situation? Because it doesn't necessarily always, if you are doing the right thing, but you might not do the right thing for everyone. You have to choose, are you doing the right thing for yourself, for other people? You know, where do you balance the priorities? Like, is mental health more important? Is safety more important? Is somebody's protection of information, like we lie because we want to protect people, or we lie because some people just can't handle the truth? Like, if my dad asks me when I'm fine, I say yes, because he doesn't like bad news. And he gets so upset, he lashes out at people. So we rather say, hey, I mean, all is great, you know, I'm handy dandy, and then there's peace on earth. But if we tell him, no, this is what's happening, my daughter's suicidal, then he makes it all about himself.
Well, Chris, I think it's a very it's a very contextual question. Depends on the context, but as a guiding rule, I would say listen to your own values, and if it feels like the right thing to do, then you behave accordingly. Yes, there might be some times where you do have to protect someone or shield them from a harsh reality, or you don't want them to worry about you unnecessarily by telling them, you know, what dire straits you might really be in. Then you have to make that judgment call. And I think it comes down to your motives and your underlying reason for why you're choosing that path or choosing to.
I've been very honest with some people, and they've taken the information and turned it around and used it against me. So you kind of learn your lesson, who and what and when you say. So you're right, it's contextual as well.
But the underlying principle is you follow your heart. You go, you know, if you're doing the right thing with the right motives, then you're playing with an infinite mindset.
That depends on people's moral compass. I mean, some people have no form of empathy and kindness, and
well, Chris, you can't control anyone else. You can't change anybody else. You can only work on yourself, and surround yourself with the right people. Don't hang out with people that are going to behave like that.
Yeah, that's why I'm in Sydney.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for your contribution today. We will continue next week with the next 2 chapters. I hope you've enjoyed this session, chapters 7 and 8 of The Infinite Game, and have a fantastic week wherever you are in the world. Catch you next time.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.